The Learning Hack is supported by a new Spring, the platform that puts the learner first, shaping journeys that help individuals learn faster and perform better. Access intelligent technology, profound insights, and a unique network of like-minded pioneers. And if you're a trainer or training provider looking to succeed in this fast-changing market, their free ebook will show you how putting the learner first is the key to winning. Download it now at anewspring.com/learnerfirst. That's anewspring.com/learnerfirst. The Tigers of Wrath, wrote 19th century poet William Blake, are wiser than the horses of instruction. Much as I admire Blake, seems to me there's a bit too much wrath about in today's world and not enough wisdom. Besides, the horse is a noble beast, as our guest this time firmly believes, and has a thing or two to tell us about learning. So let's hear it for the horses of instruction. Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what?
Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool. I'm learning.
Learning is fun.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge. Education.
We don't often run competitions on The Learning Hack. In fact, we've only ever done one. In that competition, we asked people what else they were doing when they listened to our podcasts, with the prize for the best answer. The winner told us that she likes to listen to The Learning Hack while cleansing her mucky horses. And now she's on the podcast. Kate Fitzgerald, Head of Fact. Who is she?
Hack Facts.
Sarah Ratcliff is an award-winning learning consultant, speaker and ambassador for learning with over 20 years' experience in the industry. She is currently a spokesperson for the learning provider Cegos and a regular chair for the Learning Technologies Conference. In 2020, she earned the Esteemed Learning Professional of the Year award from the LPI.
But it turns out that horses are more than just a leisure pursuit for Sarah. Keeping horses and teaching people to ride horses has taught her things about coaching, about learner engagement, and about experiential learning. And when a catastrophic life event took away her health, her livelihood, and even threatened to rob her of brain function, it was horses that helped her put the pieces back together. Sarah Ratcliff, it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome to The Learning Hack.
Thank you, John. I'm delighted to be here.
First of all, could you tell us a bit about your journey in the learning industry and your present role in Cegos? Just as a starter, how did you get into this horrible/marvellous business?
Well, it started off with Weight Watchers. So I was a member of Weight Watchers and I went along to all the meetings. And I remember looking at the leader who ran the train at the sessions that we had, thinking, oh, I'd quite like to do that. So I got into a position where I took Weight Watchers meetings, and that was a little bit like a mini training session. So we had to learn the art of presentation. We had to understand how to motivate people and to really coach people in those sessions. And so that was where it started. So when an opportunity came up to join the training team, that's what I did. So I ended up traveling the country, training up all the leaders in those skills. And I absolutely loved it. And that was where it started in the corporate world. I know we're going to talk about horses a little bit, but there's kind of a nod back to that a little bit later.
So from having got the bug there, you kind of moved into organisation roles where you were head of training, head of learning, and so on. And how did your career progress to the point where you started winning all these awards?
So I was lucky enough to meet great people along the way, great mentors that kept challenging my thinking, moving me forward. And so eventually it came to a point where I was working with Anne Summers, and I'd started to realise how I got the results that I got. And so as part of that, I really started to understand that it's really about people and how to harness what people care about and leverage that for their own personal development, which ultimately then leads into the development of the organization. So it's progressed through sort of the motivation that sat behind Weight Watchers, thinking about behavior change that sits in my world of horses, and then also sort of thinking about the neuroscience as well. So that's always been at the heart of what I've done. So it's about how can we help these people be better at what they do so that they feel great about themselves. So that's the motivational piece, I think, that leads through in all the work that I've done. And that's certainly what the judges, when I did win Learning Professional of the Year, it was about that engagement piece, because it's about learners wanting to learn.
We have a lot of technologists on this podcast and people involved in Learn Tech who have got involved in training from that route. Strikes me that your kind of roots are in face-to-face learning. Is that true to say?
Yeah, I would say it is true to say. I think it's about the people. It definitely started in face-to-face, so that people connection. And what we certainly know about the digital transformation that we're in is that we still need people to do that. There's lots of skills that have to be translated in order to make the digital transformation really happen. And so from that, I moved into the world of virtual learning. Luckily, we were ahead of the curve with COVID, which really put us in a good place. And for me, it's then about what's happening kind of in the brain and cognitively that makes that learning happen. So really thinking about how those things all link together to motivate the learner and then enable the learning to happen so that behavior change can then happen. So yes, it started in face-to-face. I think it's gone beyond that. And what we're really lucky to have at Cegos, and one of the exciting things that why I love working with them, is that, you know, we've got so many great learning technologists, you know, people that really can harness the technology to make that learning, that blend of learning, really work effectively. Because for me, in my opinion, it's about all of those things coming together. It's about human contact. It's about motivation. It's about using the technology to get the job done. And I think that they work alongside each other.
Yeah. So you'll have seen digital technology become more and more important in what you're doing in the industry, and there's this kind of been gradual move towards it. And the pandemic kind of accelerated that. Talked about your interest in neuroscience and in kind of how the brain works and so on. Do you think it's fair to say that as technology becomes more, or the business of learning involves more and more tech, that you have to kind of make that stuff explicit? I mean, this might be a caricature of it, but my kind of impression is that people who come into training and learning from a people-focused kind of direction, a lot of it is instinctual. It's because of it's working with people in groups and in the room, and that's quite instinctive. When you bring technology into the mix, somehow you have to step back and think explicitly, you know, okay, what's going on here? How do we kind of translate between that personal realm, that digital realm? Sorry, again, rather long question. I'm always doing this. But...
No, I get it. And I think you're right. I do think you're right. I think that in the room, face-to-face in synchronous learning, there is, I don't want to use the word instinct actually, because I think these are learned skills. You know, when I first started training, it wasn't instinct. I didn't know how to do it. But I learned that I could do it. And I've fine-honed those skills over time. And I think that when we're looking at the digital transformation, and whether it be e-learning, whether it be gamification, or, you know, what AI is bringing, I think we do have to think very scientifically and, you know, what's going to happen next? What impact does that have on the learner? How is the learner best going to learn? And all of those things need to be put together in a really structured and well-formulated way if they're going to make that difference. It's so easy to get it wrong.
Yeah. Apologies there for using that word instinctual in a rather sloppy way. I mean, you know, I've read my Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, and so on. And he talks about, I think it's him, he talks about instinct being a kind of way of, a proxy for, as you say, things that you've learned, learned behaviors and so on. So, but I'm kind of interested in that because I'm steering towards our next question here, which is less humans, but about animals. So your first appearance on the podcast was as the winner of our seasonal competition, which involved horses. We wanted people to tell us, what they did, what else they did while they were listening to podcasts. And your entry was the most interesting one because you cleansed your mucky horses while listening to our podcast, which kind of summoned up, made me think ever since when I'm doing a podcast, what are these people doing at the moment? And when you began to talk about coming on the podcast with me, it emerged that horses aren't just a recreation for you, but also an inspiration for your work in learning. So I'm intrigued by that. So what is it about horses that makes you say that?
So firstly, I was a riding instructor before I ever got into training. Okay. And I've been brought up with horses on the farm with animals. And horses are a real barometer of what's going on. They're a barometer of behavior, really, because you can't kid a horse. And what became really apparent to me when I moved into the world of corporate and organizational learning was that if we want somebody to change, if we want to change a behavior, we have to do something first. And my barometer is always, what would I do if this was a horse? Which I know sounds probably a bit instinctive, but you will always get it right if you bring it back to its most simple formulation, because a horse will react from any stresses that you're feeling, if you're getting it wrong. And as a riding instructor, when you're teaching, you're looking at two elements here. One, you've got a rider who you're trying to teach to communicate better with the horse. And the horse is telling you whether their communication is good enough. And so certainly when I'm sort of training and working in the leadership sphere, that communication is absolutely vital. And it features in all of our leadership courses, because without that, and without leaders understanding what's coming back at them, then they're not learning. So actually the feedback that we're getting from other human beings, if we look at it in the same way as a horse, they're telling us loud and clear what's going on. So communication is not just about what we say, but we're starting to read human behavior as communication is how we do it in the horse world, because they can't talk.
Yeah. So that's so interesting. So you're saying the horses are kind of a litmus test of, if you like, emotional authenticity. I mean, authenticity is something we talk a lot about in leadership and in training generally. And some people will say, yeah, authenticity is the main thing. If you can fake that, you'll go far in training. And in leadership as well. But what you're kind of saying is you can't kid a horse, that the horse really knows perhaps more than you do yourself what's going on inside, and so that enables you to focus on that when it comes to people in leadership. You have to be rather careful here, because it would be easy to say that, a leader is somebody, when I'm talking to a marketing manager and I'm the CEO of a company, I'm the rider, he's the horse or she's the horse, and that's a bit kind of insulting to.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think we're treading on dangerous ground here, John.
Yeah, but I think the reason for that is we tend to kind of downgrade animals, and I'm conscious of this. I know absolutely nothing about horses, but I know about dogs because I've recently become a dog owner, and it's while I've been kind of doing these podcasts about learning. So it does lead you to reflect, doesn't it? Because I'm sure dogs, you can't bullshit dogs as well, in the same way. They kind of, if you're frightened, the dog will know it.
Yeah.
So how do you not provoke a fear response in a dog that might make it kind of attack you or whatever? Well, you have to not be frightened. That's not as easy as it might sound. I had a fear of dogs when I was little because I got bitten by a dog, whatever.
Okay.
When I became a dog owner, I had to overcome that. Our animal friends bring a lot of joy in our lives, as well as learnings. But the more challenging episodes that we go through can also be a huge source of learning. Would you feel comfortable talking now about your car crash in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2003, so 20 years ago, I suffered a rather big car crash. It left me with a significant head injury, which meant that I suffered a concussion, which had an impact on my cognition. It had an impact on my memory, my speech. So I would slur my words. And it took 2 years for me to get back into the world of work. It meant that I had to move from the Isle of Man to the UK so that my husband could support me. It meant that I had to sell my horse. And to be honest, it was huge. But where it falls into my world is that it brought me into the world of neuroscience and why I'm fascinated with neuroscience and how we learn, because ultimately I had to relearn a lot of things. And so that's led me into how people learn, how we learn best, and how we can keep growing our brain using our neuroplasticity and actually creating those things that enable us to get back up and running. Because at the time, it wasn't looking very likely. And so I use a lot of resources to enable me to continue my career. I still have issues. I still have problems with cognition, especially if I'm very tired. Adrenaline usually gets me through. But it's what started that love of how is this working inside us? Where are the bits that are missing? Where do I need support? So, for example, just behind me here is a sea of Post-it notes that enable me to kind of keep going, because I don't always remember certain things very well. And so there's lots of people that we might teach, that we might, provide that training to, that are either neurodivergent or, I mean, menopause is a huge thing now. And I know the event that we were at, John, that, there's lots of talk about it now. And actually that brain fog that ladies get, but there's lots of people that are suffering in lots of different ways. But there are things that you can do if you work with what you've got. And so, yeah, it was huge. But between the car accident and working with the horses in the past, it's really enabled me to almost use that as a bit of a foundation for what I do, in learning and development, really understanding the human being that sits at the heart of it, because we are putting out learning large scale across huge organizations across the world. And since we now work so remotely, there's just a barrage of information overload coming from everywhere. And actually the work what I've learned from my car accident is that how we can help people navigate that. So that's kind of where the fascination starts. And it's really, every cloud and all that, but it's given me a deeper insight.
That must have been absolutely terrible and really frightening. And, I feel a lot of sympathy for you there, not just for, I had a bad car crash, which was a sort of major setback in my life. And I know how that feels. Losing your job and having to sell your horse, that's bad enough. But then the idea that, you come back and you're dealing with impaired cognition, that must be very, very frightening. But it's interesting what you say about how that enabled you to kind of reflect on the way that we learn and to more explicitly understand something. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, what were the kind of symptoms? Was it just forgetfulness or?
Yeah, so lots of different symptoms. So from that, I then started having really bad migraines, which I'd never experienced before. But with that cognition, this whole side of my face would drop, and I would start
like
slurring my words. Yeah, and I basically couldn't formulate my sentences. And occasionally, if I'm very tired, you can see that happening. So even now, if I'm very tired, I might just kind of lose the power of the ability to string words together. So I would lose that, what's the word? Oh God. Being able to articulate myself properly.
Yeah, fluency and
the
so on.
fluency,
Yeah.
yes. And I've always been really good at talking. So that was quite a challenge. And then also was I literally would lose short-term memory. So I would literally not, I could argue black was white to say that I hadn't been a certain place, and it might have happened the day before. So there was massive gaps in that. And it was the complete fatigue. And it took a very, very long time to recover from. And what I now know is that basically the brain's been damaged in some way. And so it takes a lot more energy to pull that together. So it can create that kind of complete flattening very, very quickly. So it's all about learning to manage yourself, which I try to do.
Yeah. So what was it like to come back from that? Was it a very conscious kind of effort, exercises, things you did every day and so on? What was it like to then get back to a position where you not only had a career again, but were winning awards?
It was bumpy. It was really bumpy. I came back to work. I had a relapse. And everything would start to go again, and I would lose all the power on this side of my body. And then I went back to Weight Watchers as a leader, so I worked part-time. I also started doing a bit with horses. So again, there's a lot to be said for that kind of therapeutic nature of being out in the fresh air. And I think there's lots of work being done now to realize actually how good that is for us.
Yeah.
And over the years, I was lucky enough to have great opportunities, meet great people. And the bumpiness comes from where I pushed too hard. So what I've had to realize is, where's my limit? Where's the barrier zone here? Is if I push too hard, I'll have a relapse. And that's been really hard because I love what I do. I love working with people and seeing them develop in exactly the same way as I do with horses. But I have to rein myself in sometimes to balance where my passion and my adrenaline is taking me, as opposed to where my brain almost can't keep up with what I'm doing. So I have to balance and really pace myself. And that's not always successful. In my career, it has been like this because as I've learned how to do that. But as I say, how have I got to the place where I've had a successful career and I've won awards is that I suppose I'm quite tenacious. I don't give up. I love what I do. And so that keeps pulling me back. And people keep giving me great opportunities. So it's about that as well. Sometimes it's about, again, connecting with people and working hard, trying hard and being motivated and wanting to keep going and make a difference.
The Learning Hack podcast is supported by Learning News, the learning sector's newswire. Rob and his team are good friends of the podcast, and we really value the help and advice we've had from them, and they do a great job. For the very latest news from around the learning sector, for interviews with learning leaders, the latest from learning sector vendors and features on workplace learning, go to learningnews.com. Those bad experiences have obviously made you somebody who's very good at working with people to help them work through their own issues. And I think you have a massively expanded empathy for that. And, how do you deal with the fact when you lose your superpower is talking and you lose your superpower and so on? How do you kind of break ground in learning new skills? But I've noticed that learner engagement is something you talk about a lot. Is that something that you've particularly come through those experiences?
Yeah, and that's why I've won the awards, really, is because what the judges said was that it was about the fact that I recognise that people need to want to learn. So for me, that engagement starts way before the training, the learning ever starts to happen, because we're all passionate about learning and development, okay? Because that's what we do. But in reality, working in corporate learning, we know that not everyone is, so that the old cliche of build it and they will come, well, they won't. So we have to understand the person. We have to understand what's going on for the individuals, and we have to understand what they care about. And when you can start to really think about that, and then how you market your learning ahead of them coming on, that's going to make a big difference. And I always go back to something that we used all the time at Weight Watchers, and that's the WIFM. So what's in it for them? So really understanding your audience right at the outset, and then enabling them to come through that journey. And then when they come through that journey, understanding what's going to keep them engaged in the process. So whether that be that full blend of technology, synchronous, asynchronous learning, working together seamlessly to keep the person motivated, to keep the person with that goal in mind as to where they're going to get to. It's that blend of engagement, starting right from here, moving throughout the entire process to come out the other end as a change in behavior. And we're really lucky in learning development. We've got so many resources at our fingertips that can enable us to create this. So learner engagement, if you haven't got it, we're not learning. You've got a training course. Doesn't mean that you're learning. And I take it personally, if, I don't want to be that trainer or that person that somebody comes out and says, oh yeah, I remember way back when I went to a training course with you. I want it to have had results. If it's not making a difference, if you haven't engaged the learner, have we done our job? And that comes back then to that accountability of what we're doing as practitioners.
People talk a lot nowadays about marketing knowledge and, the discipline of marketing in general being a useful kind of source for people like yourselves when talking about learner engagement. Do you find that useful, and to what extent?
Absolutely. As an L&D practitioner, we have to look at how we market ourselves to any learners, because this is where we can create the want to learn, the realization of what's in it for them. So that marketing piece is always at the very front end of any learning project, understanding our audience, understanding what the learners need, what the organization needs, and how you're going to market it to them, because it's about them getting the bums on seats or the fingers on keyboards in the first instance, but then making them want to come on that journey with you. So that marketing piece is engagement, and it goes hand in hand in my viewpoint, and certainly at the work we do at Cegos, that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the audiences and what the organization wants the outcome to be, and how we can make it personal for the individuals.
Yeah. I think the bits of that because my background is marketing, the bits of that people very often talk about is understanding the learner or understanding the buyer in marketing sense. And it's kind of, who is that person, what their motivators, fear, greed, personal advancement, what keeps them awake at night, what turns them on, what turns them off, and so on. But there's another aspect there are a lot of other aspects to marketing, but one of those is kind of competitors. In marketing, you're always looking competitively. So that's our learner. What is attracting them to competitive things? Is there equivalent? I suppose there is an equivalent in learning, in that there are a lot of other things that might grab their interest and enthusiasm and so on. Do you ever look at it from that point of view? That what are we competing with in our aims to kind of grab these learners? And are we going to run into problems with other parts of the organisation there if we're taking them away from?
Well, we absolutely could run into other parts of the organisation. You're right, and I think that looking at learner personas and looking at all the demands that are happening is an important part of our data. Pulling that data in at the very start of any project that we're working at, as to where are the risks here. So looking at it all as a whole is absolutely key. I think internally, if you're working internally, looking at that, I think in the work that we do at Cegos, it's probably slightly different to that. But certainly working inside an organization, understanding all the elements is an important thing to look at when you're compiling all that evidence at the very start.
Nowadays, one of the biggest things is that struggle for time. People just don't have time for learning. How do you overcome that one?
Oh, okay. So as organizations, we have to make time. We have to make time for people to do this. So we have to, one, engage them so that they want to, so that they're motivated to make time. But we also have to allow the time and provide the resources needed, because it doesn't always come down to learning, does it? And it sometimes comes down to something that makes it a bit easier for someone to do their job properly. So, what we're aiming for here, well, we're aiming for people to be performing at their best in organizations so that they feel great and the organization gets great results. So does it always come down to learning, or is it those things that we can put in place to help them? I think about my Post-it note board here. That's my resources, because some of it I can't learn, I can't retain it. So it's all of those things put together, I think.
Yeah. I often think about my own learning that, oh God, there's something I have to learn here. Something new's come up, some wrinkle in the technology, some update to the software, and this is going to take me an hour to wade through. And the thing I always have to think about is, but is it going to save me time in the long run to learn this thing now?
Yes.
And there's a kind of value equation that. So it does seem to be that time is a really important thing in learning. Sorry, I'm blathering on.
No, you're not. And what's interesting about that is that I do a lot of leadership coaching in my work, and actually that time piece comes up all the time. And one of the questions that I would always fire back is, okay, so if you don't do this, how much time is it going to take you? So that goes back to your point there of, I can spend an hour now to save time, or I can keep spending an hour here and there. And sometimes it's that step back. And this is why I believe that kind of having a good blend of, learning comes in many different guises, doesn't it? We've got so many, that there's an area for everything, for the coaching, for the synchronous, for the digital. It depends on what we're trying to do, and we have to consider where the time fits with that.
Well, you mentioned the event where we met in London recently, and you were talking about experiential learning, and I see you're interested in immersive learning as well. Technology has given us new ways of doing that. But what's the fuel mix of on and offline in that for you nowadays? I mean, obviously it's shifted, but is there a danger we have to put everybody into the metaverse to learn stuff, and people worry about things like that?
Yeah, that would scare me, and I think it comes back to that mix. It comes back to the blend. So we've got a great immersive learning program that we use. It's called Leader of the Future, and it's a real mix. It's got it's got coaching in there. It's got experiences, and where we're using the technology here is to create those emotional reactions, because that's where the brain starts to add it all together, isn't it? When we start to give people an experience, so whether that be an experience of stress or happiness or frustration, whatever it is that's happening is then connecting the brain to the experience, so it enables us to remember it more easily, and so it goes deeper. So by immersing learners in this, and it is it can be a chunk of time. But the other good thing from this is that when we've got synchronous learning, it's in the diary, isn't it? Okay. Yeah. So you're going away, back in the day, we used to go out to hotels and have immersive learning, and we'd stay there for 3 days. We'd have residential courses where we'd be in that environment. So, but we can now create that with the virtual world, with gamification. There's so many different things that we can put into these arenas that create this whole immersive environment that gives people strong emotional reactions that they can then add to what they already know, that enables us to retain it more easily, that then enables us to go out and do something more effective with it. And in my opinion, when we have those sorts of experiences, in those real life skills, leadership skills, those sort of things like that, we start to change as human beings. You know, we sort of think of feedback, for instance, that hard piece of feedback that made you cry one day, you never forget it and you change behavior. So sometimes it's about digging deeper into the human psyche a little bit further to create that shift. And I am really passionate about that, because that's what we used to do way back when I first started training. It's what I've learned through working with the horses, through my own experiences. So I know when I've really connected with somebody, and then we use all the tools around that, and you start to see that shift happen, then you've got real development happening. And we're in a position now where we can do it on a large scale because of the technology.
Reflecting on kind of what it's like to be an L&D person now compared to, say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it just seems to me there is so much more available. It took a long while for us to be able to deliver video at the sort of resolutions we have now online, but that's kind of there now. We've got VR, we've got podcasts, of course. We've got so many different, what you'd call, if you want to be posh, modalities for learning now. You know, your toolbox has expanded massively, and then there's a lot that you can use with AI. You've got more data than we've ever had. You know, how is that changing the role of L&D? Do you think? I mean, it feels to me it's turning into something more like a producer or a kind of news editor or something that you have an awful lot of stuff to coordinate. In the old days, it was just, you know, let's do a course on this, let's do a course on that, maybe.
Rocked up at a hotel, got your wheelie trolley out the back, delivered your stuff. Yeah, it's almost now like almost being a master baker, isn't it? Because certainly now when I'm looking at learning programs, I'm looking at what are the perfect ingredients to put in this recipe mix, whereby you then, you know, it tastes and looks delicious. So it is
note
more...
to the audience, and note to the international audience. We probably both last night watched the Bake Off, which is an enormous...
I haven't yet.
Okay, I won't tell you what happened. No
Don't
spoilers.
tell me what happened. It was bread week, I know that much, which
That's
is just
right,
making me hungry. And again, look what we learned from that. You know, learning is everywhere, isn't it? It's all around us. So, and if we think about that, going back to what we were saying, I know I've taken you off on a tangent, but watching that inspires you to want to go and bake bread. Just thinking about bread week makes me want to go and make bread. So already that marketing is tinkering with something in me that's going, oh, I want to do that. And so we have to market and engage our learners and inspire them to want to go and try something different. Sorry, I went off on a tangent then, but I couldn't resist. You started talking about baking.
Yeah. Bake Off. These are all good tangents, I think. We have to close up now, though, because if we talk any more about that, I'm going to give you spoilers for the Bake Off. So finally, who do you look up to following the industry? What are your kind of, you know, your water holes, so to speak? Where do you get the inspiration?
Well, I think that we're really lucky in our industry. I've never worked in an industry whereby people are so willing to share. And I think it's because we really do care about helping people develop. And so I've been really lucky. So there are so many people that I follow and look up to and get new ideas from all the time. I think my first one that I want to mention is Nick Shackleton-Jones. Because I didn't know how I got the results that I got. So I didn't have a formal qualification in learning. I'm not an academic. I can't even say the word properly. And so I loved what I do, but I didn't know how I seemed to get good results. And I remember going along to the CIPD Festival of Work, and Nick was there, and I kind of ended up buying his book, and I didn't set out to buy his book, but upon reading his book, I suddenly got it. It was a massive light bulb moment. And I thought, oh, I know how I do it now. And that was the start. That was the start of me really believing that I knew what I did. And that sort of then set me on where I won my award. And then I was lucky enough to get to know Don Taylor, who's been an amazing mentor to me. And then there's so many more. I remember watching Caroline Ford. I think it was at Learning Live one year. And she was talking about having no budget. And I had very little budget at the time. And she was doing some of the things that I was doing. And I was like, oh my goodness, I think I know what I'm doing. Yeah. And so, Caroline, the neuroscientists out there, Lauren Waldron, Stella Collins, there's so many people. And of course, we've got great people at Cegos that being part of an organization that's a global organization means that there's always somebody really knowledgeable that can come and, help you and mentor you and support you and share. And I think that's really important. And certainly I want to make sure that I keep sharing as well, because I think that we have to give back to keep our industry moving forward.
Well, perhaps I shouldn't say this because it sounds too self-aggrandizing, but every single one of the names you mentioned is a person who has been a guest on the Learning Hack podcast. So folks, you can go back and listen to all those. And now you've joined that list of people, and I'm sure people will continue to get a lot of inspiration for the stuff you've shared with us today. Thank you, Sarah, very much. It's been a really enjoyable conversation for me. And thank you for agreeing to do this and take the time at such short notice, I should say.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you, John. Really appreciate it. And it's unusual for me not to be here without a horse.
Oh, yeah.
No, there is a little one in the
background.
Next
time, you bring your horses and I'll bring me dogs.
Brilliant. Let's do that.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. Many thanks to our guest and to our sponsors. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. If you want to help others find us, please like, follow, rate, review and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube.
If you're interested in getting transcripts for these episodes, ad-free listening and bonus content, head over to our Patreon page and help to keep the flame alive. Until next time.
Stay curious, learning people.